Howdy, folks. Happy Monday. We are back after a rather busy weekend in terms of hockey news for late July. We'll discuss the stories in a few minutes. We have some pre-show stuff. I have to say, you could call me traveling man the last few days. I went up to see ELO on Thursday, and Russ was dead on. That was one of the best shows I've seen in a long time.
I'm telling you, it's memorable, man.
Jeff Lynne was fantastic. His voice is really good. The band is great. Lee, you mentioned Lee Pomeroy. He's phenomenal on the bass. And it was, I mean, the highlight of the show in Toronto was him doing Telephone Line, and the crowd singing along was, I sometimes I get a little jaded about the crowd singing along. I'd rather hear the artist, but he clearly was into it because you could see the expression on his face that he loved them singing along. So it was a great show. So that was concert one of my summer tour, and then I went to New York to see the Yankees destroy the Colorado Rockies. I think it ended up being 9-5 or 10-5. But Russ, they were passing out ice bags in the right field bleachers. I luckily enough was sitting in a section where it was in the shade, and I had pre-scouted, so I knew that it would be in the shade. But it was so hot; it was 100 degrees. The heat index was over 110, I think, and they were passing out Ziploc bags with ice from the concession stands where it was that bad.
Yeah, I too heavily hydrated yesterday. I played in a charity softball game in Brooklyn, and we played 9 innings of fast pitch softball. So in 100-degree heat. So that was something. We survived though. But I want to talk about the Baseball Hall of Fame for a minute, and not so much for this class. I wrote about it on Sportsology. You can read. I only did a little bit on this class, but my biggest complaint right now at the Baseball Hall of Fame is a player that I watched growing up, Ted Simmons, is still not in. And was he the best defensive catcher? No. Was he one of the best offensive hitting catchers? Yes. Was he just a great hitter? Yes. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting because the guy was an 8-time All-Star. 5 times he was in the top 10 of OBP, which back in his day no one cared about, right, but it was important. Doing more research, he even caught at the end of his career, even though he did play some DH and third base, he caught 1,771 games. Like, even at the age of 38, he was catching games. Even in the World Series, he was catching games because, as Mike pointed out to me, like when Milwaukee played St. Louis in the World Series, there was a DH and no DH. And so on the St. Louis game, and they caught him.
Yeah, in the NL ballparks.
In the NL ballpark, and they caught him in those games, which, just showed his value, and he batted cleanup. He had 100 sack flies in his career, got one in that game. The guy's a tremendous player. And so there's a really good report on Baseball Reference that shows like on-base percentage and WAR and a few other things and measures it for players like 7 years, best, 7-year flip in their career that's like their prime, right? Mm-hmm. And I've always believed in that. He's 10th on that list for catchers. And the only guy that's ahead of him who isn't in yet is Joe Mauer, which he has to wait. And 3 or 4 guys behind him are already in. And so to me, it's like, how is he not in? It's crazy.
Now, Jan, I have to say this because, I want, if there's you and Anthony, if there's a player like Ted Simmons that you think should be in, that's what I was going to ask you. But like with me, the Harold Baines, and I always liked Harold Baines. I thought Harold Baines was on pace to be a Hall of Famer when he played in the 80s, but he ended up being a compiler at the end of it. Him getting in, to my mind, allows, the reality of a guy like Don Mattingly and a guy like Keith Hernandez, 2 of my favorites when I was younger, getting in the Hall of Fame. If Baines hadn't gotten in, they maybe didn't have enough hits or maybe didn't have enough home runs or whatever. But I think Mattingly should get in now. I think Hernandez should get in. Are there any ones, Jan, you first, that you think haven't gotten in that should?
Well, a couple of things. So first of all, Russ, on your thing, I just took a look. The interesting stat to me is 855 walks to 694 strikeouts for Simmons. Ooh. That's just a ridiculous stat, that guys. And I remember, I grew up in the era watching Simmons also. I also was up in Cooperstown, I think you guys know, about a month ago before everything took place. The interesting part I thought was that the bookstores were selling Jay Jaffe's Cooperstown Confidential book on the newsstands, which takes a hacksaw to the whole process in itself, and it's a really good read if you haven't read, and he's written a whole bunch of stuff of it. look, I am in agreement. I think the viewpoint with Mattingly and Hernandez is, did you have a dominant stretch of action, and is that dominant stretch of action enough to warrant a shortening of a career, or especially in the case of Mattingly, right? Because if Mattingly's back had never gone out, he would have made the Hall of Fame. He would have been a lock for making the Hall of Fame based upon his numbers. Hernandez is one of those I think is gaining a lot more interest based upon the defensive metrics and his ability to play defense and how we revolutionized playing defense from first base. I mean, the guy, for me, and Russ can probably test to this also, it's more Veterans Committee, is Gil Hodges, right? You look at his numbers when he retired. You look at what he did defensively. You look at him taking the Mets to the World Series and winning the World Series. You look at how they talk about him, how he changed the fortunes of that franchise, how he made that team grow up, and how the team played underneath him. To me, that's probably the guy that, from a Veterans Committee perspective, has to get in. Baines is one of those where you look at the WAR, you look at all the advanced metrics, is one that maybe should not have gotten in. You have the argument similar sometimes with Puckett because he only had a shortened period of dominance. He didn't have an extended period because of his eyes and the glaucoma and everything else. But I'm one of those that I would not have a problem with Matty getting in because he had about six years at least at a minimum of dominance. Yeah. Hernandez is one where the numbers were good, but then when you add on the defensive metrics and his ability from first base and how he revolutionized playing defense from first base against the bunt, to me that has to be a huge factor as to whether or not he gets a shot at the Hall.
NL MVP in '79, 2 World Series, one with the Mets, one with the Cardinals. I mean, 11, 12 Gold Gloves. I mean, something like that.
I'll add to Hodges. In his playing days, he was also a many-time All-Star, a Gold Glove first baseman, and a great RBI man. If you look up his RBI, it's tremendous.
Oh, I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer just on his hitting career, on his playing career with the Dodgers. Anthony, is there anybody that is sort of your cause in terms of a guy who's not in the Hall of Fame who
I don't necessarily have a specific cause per se, although certainly growing up in Philadelphia, you always hear about Dick Allen. Hear about Dick Allen. These go back to he should be in the Hall of Fame. And looking just over his general numbers and everything, I think there's definite cause for warrant for his inclusion.
I can tell you this: I wrote a book with Howie Carpenter, who scores for the Mets and the Yankees. He's the official scorer, baseball's best rookies, and Dick Allen won Rookie of the Year. We put him in there, and we both believe he should be a Hall of Famer. I got to see him like middle to end of his career. He had maybe the best power at that position when he was playing. Like when he would hit a ball out of the ballpark, the exit velo, if you could test it now, would have been insane for Dick Allen. Like that's how strong he was.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think the interesting part, when we'll see what happens this year, is obviously the argument about Larry Walker and whether how inflated his numbers are because of Coors Field. Because you look at his ability as an outfielder. It's going to be very interesting to see whether or not he gets enough votes to get over the burden in his last year to make the Hall.
See,
we can go through for hours in terms of the 10-year voting and the 10 years and all that is ridiculous.
I think the contributing factor with Walker though is he hit like that in Montreal and he hit like after that. Really,
that would be my argument there.
Not the average and not the doubles. If you look at the average and doubles, it took a major jump from Montreal to Colorado. And that was the Colorado effect.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely an effect. And I know like a guy like Todd Helton, that's going to be helpful.
Well, I loved Helton. Yeah. I loved Helton. Yeah. That's one of those guys I think that's going to be a borderline guy when he will, if he's going to make the Hall. Because in his prime, for about 6 or 7 years, Helton was an absolute beast.
Yeah, I think Helton
both defensively and offensively in Colorado.
Right. Helton didn't have anything other than his career in Colorado. I mean, I don't know if he – So, I mean, at least Walker played in Montreal and his stats were great. And he afterward in St. Louis, late in his career, he had great stats. So I think that helps his cause. Anyway, we'll talk about this more later on in the season when there's not much to talk about. But we actually have some stuff to talk about today. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Monday, July 22nd, 2019.
I'm Anthony Majoni from Center Ice Magazine.
I'm Jan Levine.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
And I'm the Sultan of SWAT, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.
Sultan of Sweat? What was that?
More like that, exactly.
Well, after 100 degrees, I was that too, Jan.
That's why I made the comment.
And this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Well, we talked about this last week as a report and a rumor that Eric Duhatschek of The Athletic had mentioned, and we scoffed a little bit. I have to tip my hat and doff my chapeau to Eric Duhatschek for reporting this because I didn't think it was likely James Neal to Edmonton for Milan Lucic, but lo and behold, it happened. I'm puzzled. I'm really puzzled. Now, I think the main motivation here is they both have the same length of contract remaining, 4 years. Mm-hmm. It clearly was not working for Neil in Calgary. It clearly, obviously, was not working for Lucic in Edmonton, and they balanced it out with a retention of $750,000. I think now Calgary is paying $525 to Lucic the remaining 4 years, and Neil's contract is $575 for 4 more years. Yeah. But not the money, but just the players. Mm-hmm. Anthony, I'll start with you. I think Ken Holland raped the Calgary Flames because I think Neil has something left. I don't know if Lucic has anything left.
Well, I will say this, that I definitely will tip my direction towards Edmonton in this circumstance. I do think Neil, I think overall has a chance of fitting in pretty well. Potentially, I could see him potentially on a top 6 line, but more likely to be maybe in a 3rd line role with Edmonton. I think there's more of a chance for an offensive return in his circumstance. I also have to tip my hat actually in many ways to Bob Stauffer because in very early July at the beginning of free agency when he was asked about Lucic, he pretty much said, I'd keep my eye on late towards the end of July. But there may be something that happens then. So Stauffer actually had this even earlier. Okay. And Duhacek obviously put it through. So Lucic, that'll be fascinating because if they get Sam Bennett back, which they will in all likelihood, Calgary, that's going to be a fascinating line potentially if they put Bennett and Lucic on a line together, just from the agitation standpoint. More than anything, but in terms of if you have to have me handicap who I think gets a better return out of this over the long haul, I think it's definitely a better with everything involved and even with the player involved that Neil I think will fit in better there in Edmonton.
Russ, how about Lucic, Jankowski, and Bennett?
or Ryan too.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't have much hope for Lucic over there. He'll add toughness that they'll like. He's not going to add as many points as they'd like. So I'm not sure about that. James Neal, he's been in decline for 3-4 years. I know he had that nice year in Vegas, but everybody had a nice year in Vegas. When they needed Neal in the playoffs, they actually benched him because I mean, it's just
end of the day. Bad mix. It was just honestly, they said from the beginning, there was talk out of Calgary almost from jump that this was a bad mix. That it just
I mean, I'll give you this.
Early on, they were trying to make it work, but it really was. Yeah. A square peg in a round hole situation. At least that's what I got from a lot of people in California.
No. I think there's some truth to that. That's why I'll give him 30 points, but I don't know if he's getting more than that. So, but I still think Ken Holland won this deal on the salary cap game.
Yeah.
End of the day, that's where he won this deal because Ken Holland, I was told a couple months ago that he was going to move Lucic out after I did another show with somebody from the area. And so I knew about it. We all knew they were going to try.
Sure.
But he got it done. And so to me, that was bigger than whoever he traded, whoever he received, what other draft picks went out the other way, because that's going to at least give Edmonton the ability to breathe down the road. And that's where I think they did well in this trade. Otherwise, I don't think there's a winner.
Jan, do you think this is just change of scenery and both of them have flaws and that's all that's gained here is maybe they go someplace else and they play better because it clearly wasn't working in either place?
Well, it's good to know that Lucic no longer feels the pressure of being the man where he's going because that clearly was the issue with Connor McDavid there, that he felt that pressure to be the man there. So I think it is, yes, a case of one problem child for another. I think when both deals were signed at the time, we all scratched our heads and going, what were each team thinking based upon the offers that were given out to each of them? So it is clearly a case where each side hopes that a change of scenery will make a difference. I am of the view that there's more of a likelihood that Neil rebounds a little bit in Edmonton than Lucic rebounds in Calgary, just because, Lucic is slow of foot. He's gotten slower of foot. Maybe he'll be an agitative type of player. He's not going to probably won't score a ton of goals unless maybe you kind of stick him in front on the power play and hope he gets some stuff in front of the net. Neil has a shot to maybe be, I don't think he'll be a first line, but maybe a second line player in Edmonton because I just don't think he has the wheels to keep up with the first line, depending on how they constituted. if you're going to bet on one, I'd bet on Neal, but I'm not necessarily betting the house on either one of them in terms of a rebound. Though, if I'm taking a flyer on somebody, if I'm doing my fantasy league, I'm taking a flyer, I might take a late flyer on Neal with the hopes that maybe he gets a boost just from the talent he's playing around there. But he did have the same opportunity in Calgary. I'm just not going to take that same bet on Lucic given the expected role he's going to have in Calgary.
Right, and right now Calgary has got a little under $10 million in cap space, but they have Bennett, they have Matthew Tkachuk still to re-sign, and I mean, if the motivation here for Calgary is to get tougher, then I think they accomplished their goal with Lucic. I mean, if you put Tkachuk in that lineup and Bennett in that lineup, and now Lucic as sort of a rabble rouser, I mean, they can have that effect.
Where's Brian Burke? He used to be like the ultimate truculent lineup at this point now.
Right.
He already left.
Now,
it's going to be like old-time hockey, right?
Right. But now, can James Neal be the Matt Molson to McDavid's Tavares, meaning a slower guy who will just go to the front of the net and let McDavid feed him? I don't know if he's even play with McDavid, but I think that's the only chance that Neal has to be a contributor in Edmonton. But right now, Russ, Edmonton has only got $2.4 million in cap space, and they're really not much better than they were last year.
No, I mean, for this year, that is going to be the case. Funky pointed out in the chat room that Calgary will have to protect Lucic in the expansion draft. It'll cost them a player where Edmonton now won't have to worry about that.
Right.
So that's another win for Ken Holland just down the road. So I think this is all down the road for Edmonton doing
because of the no move clause.
Because of the no move clause.
Now the question is,
you can buy him out though, can't you?
They can buy him out, but did he?
Right, that'll be in 2 years, so it'll be 1 year left. 1 year left on the deal.
Did he waive the no move clause? That's
the way to get it. I mean, I remember Darren Dreger indicated that we get hung up a lot on the no movement clause. If you talk to the player in most circumstances, and considering where the expansion team is going to be, again, it's very obvious that when Lucic signed in Edmonton, beyond the competitive thing, was also the fact that he wasn't that far from family and from home. So if he was to get snagged in the expansion draft, it's Seattle. I think it's not a case. I think maybe maybe the NMC is being overstated a little bit when it comes to him going in the expansion draft.
No, that's fair. That's totally fair. What I do reject are the articles that come out like all of a sudden, James Neal's just going to pick it back up again. It's like, listen, we all know what James Neal is. James Neal had a really nice run. It's not like James Neal's getting any faster. It's not like, I remember watching a practice once when Philly was playing Calgary, and Calgary was practicing, and Yager was trying to play with Gaudreau and Monahan, and he couldn't do it. And he started laughing, and then he jumped in on another line. And that's what it's like for a guy like James Neal now, because when you try and jump in on a fast line, he can't do it. It's not in him anymore. So he's going to have to play on a slower line that's out there to gain puck possession and maybe the occasional dirty knee that James Neal is very good with, and go from there. Because those are his skill sets right now.
In case you wanted to know what Russ's position is on James.
I'm sorry, Anthony, have you never seen that knee?
Oh, come on. I mean, I know. I'm just being
James Neal is the Chase Utley of the NHL.
Wow. That was
hot take.
Other Hall of Fame suggestion at the beginning of the show to annoy
for
Russ.
a while there. I was a huge Utley fan, and he was definitely on target for a while.
Yeah, Ruben Tejada.
And then the Ruben Tejada incident happened, and that threw it all out the window.
Okay, Jan, I'm going to start with you on this one because
what direction are you going in there?
Well, we knew that Jacob Trouba was going to get extended. It made no sense that if he agreed to be traded to the Rangers that there wouldn't be an extension. I was a little taken aback by the amount. I thought it would be a little less than 8, and it ends up being 8 for 7 years. I think he's a top 15 in the league defenseman, but I think his salary right now is top 5. What did you think of that signing?
So when he got dealt, right, you knew, as you said, it was going to be a long-term deal. The only question was whether or not they would attempt to do what they did with Lundqvist, which was sign him to a 1-year tender, in essence, to avoid arbitration, and then sign him to a longer-term deal. And clearly, both of those, going that route has ramification on both sides. How one, obviously, the player is going to want to have to do it and taking the risk that he's going to get hurt. But on the flip side, he has the ability to make more money potentially if he has a monster season.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew that he was going to end up being in New York, especially when it came out that, his fiance is going to have the opportunities as she becomes a doctor to be in New York. So we knew he was going to end up there in general. It was a one team that he wanted to. And if you read the article on NHL.com, he said the same thing. So he clearly didn't give the Rangers any kind of hometown discount from the place to where he wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
He made 5.5 in arbitration. He made 5.5 last year. You figured he was going to be in the 6.5 range in arbitration this year,
right?
Meaning he was likely going to get $7.5 million in a long-term deal. To me, I predicted the range to be $7.5 million to $8.5 million, hoping to be on the lighter end at the $7.5 million side over the 7 years. The $8 million was surprising mildly because I was kind of hoping it would be at the $7.5 million, but I wouldn't say it was shocking, especially because you're looking at about a $500,000 variant year over year from an AAV. So I will say that the $8 million was not distasteful. It was something I was kind of hoping they'd be on the lighter end of the range that I kind of predicted and a lot of people predicted. If you look at The Athletic and Dom Luhacek's kind of writing, Dom Luszczyszyn's writing on it, he still predicts the Rangers to get $3.1 million in profit based upon the advanced metrics that he used. So as a deal overall, it's not a bad deal. Is it something I wish they had saved a little bit of money, especially given the cap constraints that they're currently under? Yeah, absolutely. But if Trouba plays like he did last year and continues his development, but especially if he becomes the right side pair mate to Brady Shea and makes Brady Shea look like he did 2 years ago, then to me it's money more than well worth spent because you're getting a 2-for-1 in terms of the transition there.
Now, Russ, I want your opinion on the contract, but also, and I believe one of the 3 RFAs they have, Buchnevich, Lemieux, and D'Angelo, one of them they're going to arbitration with. So they have a second. I believe they'll have the availability of a secondary arbitration window for buyout. Does this mean that either Shattenkirk, Stahl, or Brendan Smith go the buyout route?
Yeah, I think it's Brendan Smith. I mean, Shattenkirk you could still get use out of, and maybe he'll bounce back. He's not making that much. Smith is not making a ton, but it's just a ton for what he actually gives you on the ice.
Right.
And Stahl, you know what? They could bury Stahl in the AHL at some point next year, year after, if they have to. But he had a pretty good year last year, so they have to give him a chance to come back and follow that up. And to be honest, right now Mark Stahl's in an area where really only Harry Howell was. As far as how many games played as a defenseman as a Ranger. Like that's, fans probably discount that, but go look it up. He's played a lot. And he's been a good player. It's not his fault he had that injury. It's, again, people forget the player he was before the injury. He's rebounded pretty good considering the injury. Anyhow, moving past, with Trouba, I thought it would be around 7.5, 8. I'm not upset. What I find interesting is, though, between some media and a lot of Ranger fans, there is always this backlash like, oh, he'll be the next Wade Redden, or, oh, and it's like Wade Redden had problems off the ice that really hindered him from being good on the ice, right? Trouba has never had an issue. So I don't think Trouba's going to have any issues with New York. I know the guy a little bit because I covered him in his junior career. I've interviewed him a bunch. He's a pretty level-headed guy. This is where he wanted to go. So this is a smart move for the Rangers and for him because, again, he's a top 2 defenseman. I don't know how anybody looks at him otherwise.
Right.
Forget about where he might have played for Winnipeg. Like, those are different situations. He's going to get more offensive situations in New York than he's ever gotten in his pro career. Mm-hmm. Go back to what he would do in college or his junior career, then you'll get a better idea of what he actually may be able to do still in the NHL career. And I think you look at that and you just look at just reliable defensemen. That's going to help. He's also friends with Brady Shea. Right. Like there's a lot of good things there. He knows Fox. So now you got 3 guys that know each other really well on a defensive unit. That's smart.
And Anthony, 3, like the right side of the Rangers blue line now is Trouba, Shattenkirk, and Fox. Not too shabby. I mean, in the span of a couple of years, that's one of the better right sides in the league.
Is that Pearl agreeing with you?
No, that's Kaya.
That's Kaya.
Kaya agree.
Kaya loves me. She loves my phone.
No, it's an impressive right side of the blue line, and again, it's a critical point. I think for New York, in the same way that Philadelphia decided to do what they did with their defense in terms of the right side, how important it is to have that. So it strengthens them. It strengthens them nicely. I'm a big fan of Adam Fox. I think he's in that circumstance again. In a potential third pair, it's fantastic for New York.
Now, just bring it just bring this contract, even though, Trouba was 25 or 26, 1 year away from being a UF. It's a different circumstance because he has, an established base of what he has done in his career, and he proved he could score. He had over 50 points last year, so he's at a different stage in his career than Ivan Provorov is. But when you see this amount, and I mean, Provorov's agent and probably is saying, okay, that's in the neighborhood of what we want, but I don't think he's going to get that.
No, I don't think he's going to get that. He's again, heard this enough times where, there's been some whispers that, Provorov wants Aaron Ekblad money. That's some of the things that I'm heard.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's not going to get in that range. He's not going to get in that range. It's different circumstances here as well. I think the biggest thing we're going to be taking a look at here with Provorov is the fact that, I think Philly is either looking at, they would prefer probably a long-term deal that takes him into his UFA years, whereas Provorov in this case may want a shorter-term deal that takes him up to the beginning of his UFA status. But the numbers that are being, potentially bandied around are still probably too high. So it's a different circumstance with Trouba. Again, longer at this point of his career, been around, obviously longer. Circumstance different, closer to his UFA status. So it's definitely not a complete. It's not a match here. Initially, if you looked at the number and from first glance, even I thought about it. And then when you really think about the situation, I don't think that's going to be the contract that Ivan's going to get.
No, I don't think that.
So a couple of things. So just going back on what Russ said. So in terms of the cap savings, right? So that's kind of the key. So Stahl is only $2.9 million this year, so it only helps them somewhat. For Smith, the cap hit is only $970,000, which is almost like burying him in the minors with a $3.7 million savings. Next year, the hit's $3 million with a $1 million saving. The big thing is Shattenkirk. If you got rid of him, you're saving $5 million this year with a $1.4 million cap hit, but you're taking a $6 million cap hit next year.
Yeah,
that's a huge amount, which is why Smith, just on the face of it, makes a lot more sense in terms of who you're going to do. But that's not going to be enough to get them cap compliant. Give them the other guys. So there is going to be a second move, and because of the fact that both Trouba and Buknevich elected to go to arbitration, they don't have to settle. Even if they settle with either one of them, they still have that second buyout window that they can utilize.
Yeah, as soon as they went to arbitration, that window.
Right.
I mean, they're trading. Look, they're trading either Buchnevich or Nemestikov. We know that. That's how they'll get cap compliant. I would prefer to keep Buchnevich because I think him and Panarin can do something. To answer Joe though in the chat room, he's like how's Trouba going to do better with the Rangers? He feels like he'll be exposed because Winnipeg has a better offense, and it's like. Again, Trouba was playing a role for them.
Yes.
Dustin Byfuglien was in his way. There were other defenders that had different roles.
Yeah.
Just because the offense is better, and by the way, this year that might be arguable that the offense is still better in Winnipeg. We'll see. It probably will be, but you don't know that yet. Trouba's really good in his own end, and he can be offensive too. He gets 50 points.
Right.
Do you think he's not going to get 50 points with the Rangers because he's not with Winnipeg? I would bet against that.
I mean, he's not going to get power play time, but I'll tell you right now, like I know that when
he'll get power play time. He absolutely will.
Over Shattenkirk?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think. By the way, I want you to ask Tessier tomorrow. Said one guy in the blog commented he thought Trouba was the third best blue liner in Winnipeg behind both Morrissey and Byfuglien.
Okay.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Byfuglien can barely play the position anymore. Come on.
Right. I mean, well, okay. Enjoy that opinion. No,
no, open it up, Mike. What does Dustin Byfuglien do defensively now? Tell me.
Defensively, he's been inept since he was in Chicago.
Okay, well, that's a part of
the wing.
That's a big part of his game.
Yeah, I mean, offensively he's a dynamo. But the problem is, if I had to compare somebody and not the physical part of his game, but the actual, jumping into the offense type, I think Dustin Byfuglien is akin to Sergei Gonchar. He's more of a rover than he's a defenseman.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, now, Jan, I'm going to go to you first on this one and then you, Russ. I was flabbergasted when I saw the announcement of the 2-year extension of Neil Pionk. 101 games, 7 goals, 33 assists, 40 points, 2 years in the league, 1.25 years, and he gets $1 million AAV. Is Cheveldayoff clueless because this is a deal that does not make any sense.
I won't call him clueless because
I know. I'm just if I met the guy, I'm sure I'd shake his hand and say you're a good guy. But I'm just saying this is a baffling sign.
It's a bad deal. This is almost trying to justify what he is. Again, the problem with like the Rangers and Rangers media is if you get a guy in there that has a little bit of offense in his game early on, like Del Zotto, like Pionk, they initially go, look, he's got some Brian Leetch capabilities. And they never do. They never do.
Right.
And they should never go there, but they always do, right? So Pionk got a lot of opportunity on a bad team. Now, he's not on a bad team anymore, and he's still going to get a fair amount of opportunity. And now the pressure is being turned up. He had zero pressure in New York. The problem with Neil Pionk is parts of his defensive game that are so deficient, like zero pushback, like standing by the net and just watching goals go in and not doing anything, that will kill some of his playing time if Paul Maurice stays in as coach. That's the problem. As much as you'll like his shot and his puck-moving ability, that other part of his game, we're not going to even call deficient. We're going to call non-existent.
Jan, what did you think of that sign?
So, I mean, again, so like I said, if you had told me he'd gotten 2 years, $3 million total, I would have thought it probably was really closer to being fair. Let's say $3.5 million over 2 years. But as Russ said, his defensive deficiencies so grossly outweigh his offensive capabilities that even David Quinn had to put him in the press box last year or bench him. He was horrific in his own end. He's horrific at clearing the front of the net. There were issues last year in terms of communication behind it, in terms of chasing the puck still again. That was the same thing under AV. I am reluctant to say that he's an idiot, but I just don't understand what Cheveldayoff was thinking with this kind of a deal because it just doesn't make sense in the face. There was no rational reason to give him $3 million a year. You could have gone with a much less salary, clearing up room because you still got to sign Patrick Laine, and you have other guys you still got to get under contract. So why are you paying him at least $1 million a year more than he probably deserves?
Anthony,
unless there's movement, again, the way things seem to be moving with Winnipeg, you almost think they're going to be making a trade.
Yeah.
The way if you're going to spend that kind of money on Neil Pionk, and there's things about Neil Pionk's game I like, but I'm not $3 million liking him. Let's put it that way.
Did you buy an Andy Delmore jersey back in the day?
Did I buy an Andy Delmore jersey back in the day? No.
TJ Brennan? Did you buy a TJ Brennan jersey?
But it might as well be in this case, right? I mean, it might as well be Andy Delmore. So, yeah, that's what I'm thinking here in this circumstance, that, we've heard enough whispers about Ehlers getting moved earlier on during free agency. Somebody's getting moved. I just don't see how they're going to get the remaining players under contract without somebody being moved off.
It's funny because I messaged this to Peter earlier this morning. There were a reporter named Jeff Hamilton, based out of Winnipeg, was talking about potential for a Ristolainen deal with Buffalo, which has been long rumored, and the names that were there were Ehlers and Roslovic and Matthew Perreault. Okay, Ehlers for Ristolainen is a wash. It's $5.4 to $6 million, so they'd only gain $600,000 in cap space. No, the Sabres are not taking Matthew Perreault for Ristolainen. Now, I could see them trading Matthew Perreault if they needed to jettison a salary to open up cap space, but nobody's going to do them any favors. They're probably going to want, if they're going to trade Matthew Perreault, who's making, I think, $4 million, they're probably going to want a good prospect out of the Jets organization to take the guy.
Yeah, I think you would have an easier time trying to move Brian Little. I think he'd be the guy to move because
I think he's got a no move. I think he's got some no trade.
Oh, but he's probably got a list.
Yeah,
and he's got 4 more years after this year at $5 million per. I'm sorry, that's not an easy move by any.
It's not an easy move, but he still can play too. It's not like
not
play.
Matthew Perreault's got 2 years left at $4 million. To me, that's a heck of a lot easier move than a guy making $5 million for the next 5 years. In my opinion, is an okay number 2 center, but declining also.
Yeah, they'll be competing with the Rangers, like in terms of like we're going to trade Nemestikov or
right.
That's not an onerous contract, but it is a sizable investment.
But Nemestikov is 1 year left, right? And the thing that guys talked about on the site, and I agree with them, and a bunch of guys who dove a lot of the cap stuff in terms of on Twitter, the Rangers could have potentially front-loaded that deal, thereby reducing the actual payment, right? So you look at the Anisimov deal, that happened, right? They gave him the bonus and then they moved him. So there's a bunch of deals like that where guys will pay that bonus by X date, and then you see them get moved because the other team doesn't have to have it physically hand out cash. That's what makes it a lot easier to make a deal like this.
No, that's true. I mean, we'll see how it goes. I do have to report that in our chat room, Funky Cold Dina got excited because there's another guy in there, Funky Bro Brudina. Like, oh, look, I'm famous, the guy. And then the guy quickly nixes that by saying, when I got my name, you were still on the milk bottle. So these guys are feuding now in the chat room.
Calm down, folks.
I'm not sure what that says.
Yeah.
We need to get Pablo Kubina in to break them up.
This is what happens when there's no hockey.
Is that Funky Cole Kubina?
Yeah, pretty much.
This is what happens when there's no hockey. That's my basic.
I'm still shuddering at that $5 million.
And it's 100-degree heat in New York for 2 days. That's what happens.
I'm still shuddering at that $5 million contract the Leafs signed him to. Okay, and another signing that was a little conspicuous by its length was Oscar Sundqvist, who played pretty well in the playoffs for the Blues. I thought he was a decent contributor. He got suspended for a game. The funny thing was, I didn't think this guy was an aggressive player, especially after he got laid out by Tom Wilson in the preseason. Right. But then he ended up playing. He played sort of more of a crash and bang style as the season went along. Well, the Blues signed him for 4 years, $11 million, $2.75 million per. And Russ, that's a little pricey again.
It's really pricey. I mean, I get it. He had 30 points. I look at this as a career year for him.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to match that. I think he can get 10 goals. I think he can get 25 points. He's a centerman. If he is going to play this sandpaper role, maybe they're getting their money's worth.
That's what I think. That they're anticipating.
He has to do it now for a full season. Like he has to.
Well, you can look at him as almost another tie-in with Craig Berube, right? I mean, everybody's getting 3-year deals, and he suddenly, interestingly enough, Chief becomes his coach, and he plays with a bit more of a hard edge, and he became one of Chief's favorites, I think, in a lot of circumstances.
He had 101 hits on the year. I guess that's the worth, and he's a centerman. But
he's a guy I think you can count on as a third or fourth over time in that bottom six role. You need strength down the middle.
You do. It's just a little high of a payment. The term is high.
But you got to figure in 2 years if he's not meeting it right, he's one of those guys you expose in the expansion draft and could be interesting to a Seattle team.
Yeah, it could be valuable to Seattle. Absolutely,
that's fair.
Okay, and for our Leaf segment of the day, I'm sure.
Oh boy, here we go.
No, well, first that Mitch Marner came out on Thursday. He was holding an event in Toronto for charity. He did last year and is doing again this year, and did some interviews with Tim and Sid on Sportsnet and some other outlets, and it was very conspicuous in terms of what he didn't say. He did not want to say anything. Sorry, I'm doing a Russ Cohen here with the.
No, it's I thought that was Eklund getting.
No, Russ's phone is always ringing. But he was careful not to be too sort of sentimental while playing for his hometown team. He clearly wants to, but I think if he led on to that, it would take away from the leverage that the Marner camp has. But he also, when somebody was asking, well, what are you looking for in terms of term? What are you looking for in terms of money? He says, that's for my agent. So he did a hard pass on anything that could be, informational when it came to his contract situation, which I can't interpret the way, Russ. I think he's trying to stay out of it. I think he, unlike William Nylander, who I think did not rise above the fray, I think Marner is attempting to rise above the fray, and it only gets confrontational if it gets closer to October 1st. And Larry Brooks, in his Sunday Slapshots column, was talking about I think he did an interview with Neil Smith talking about the Sakic free agent situation back in, I think it was 97, and how the ownership of the Rangers wanted him to move on to Paul Kariya, and he basically said, it's not going to work and I'm not going to do it. And that, the offer sheet is not the way that many general managers want to go. And the only way that a Marner situation is going to work is if a team waits to the 11th hour just before the beginning of the regular season, and when the Leafs don't have the advantage of the 10% extra, and puts them in a corner. And that's the only way. But again, the Marner camp has to agree to it. And I don't know whether he wants to go or not. That's the whole.
I will tell you, having played softball with a bunch of New York reporters, that's what they think will happen. And they think the Islanders will do that. I disagree with it, but they do think that they will do it at the last minute. Getting past that, to me, the only good answer was talk to my agent. I'm happy to answer any other questions about me, my playing career, my charity. I'm not talking about my contract. That was the only acceptable answer. When he opened it up, even to just say, yeah, I'm not going to be in camp if I'm not signed,
right?
That is coming from the Paul Marner camp to try and turn the heat up on the Leafs, and it's in poor taste right now. If I'm Brendan Shanahan, I'm coming out in the next day or two with a retort, because at some point he needs to apply some pressure too, because pressure's a two-way street. Mitch Marner, if he wants to sign an offer sheet and not be a Leaf, that's a detriment to his career, because this is where he's flourished, where he likes to be, where he fits in. You never know what's going to happen down the road when all of a sudden another team signs you and maybe that coach doesn't work well with you, your points drop, and then all of a sudden your next contract isn't what you hoped it would be. That could happen too.
Anthony, I don't think anybody is in control at this point. Anybody has an advantage at this point. But as it gets closer to October 1st, I think the advantage goes to the Marner camp. That's why I don't think the Leafs are going to let it go that long. They're either going to get an answer from him at a certain point, or they say, okay, we're going to start exploring trade options here. I don't think they want to do that. I think, but they need an answer, and they're not going to continue to say, oh, well, we'll talk about it in September. No, let's talk about it now, because
which is why I don't, unlike, I'm going to disagree with Russ and say that I don't think Shanahan is going to do a retort. I think in this circumstance, he's just going to continue to put his head down, and they're going to work on – he and Dubas are going to try to continue to work on a deal. I think they're going to let it go in the ether and just continue to bang away at it so they get this contract done before we get to that point.
Jan, I mean, the one thing I took from the Larry Brooks piece is, like, the Rangers, and you could say this about the Leafs, say this about the Flyers, about big market teams, that these big market teams have the advantage in terms of the money that they make to throw offer sheets around, but they simply don't do it because of the ramifications throughout the league that these general managers have to face. Neil Smith didn't come out and say that he was blackballed because of the Sakic offer sheet, but I sort of get in the hint in the background that he was, in a way. That he was in a way.
He took a ton of pressure and a ton of heat after that contract was signed. Now again, if Sakic had come to New York, that would have had a massive ramification on what happened, because you look at Messier coming back, you look at Manning Gretzky a year later, or that same year actually. If Air Force One had only opened 1 week later, that's what a lot of us Ranger fans still say, because they would have never had the opportunity to match, because they had the revenue they could count on from it. But Neil Smith definitely took a ton of flack at that time, and he took it for years later, and had an impact in terms of his career as a general manager. And you can talk about big money teams having the ability to throw out offer sheets, right? So Montreal did it for Aho, right? But if you look at some of the ones that Dustin Penner won years ago, didn't come from a big market team. I would say that a team that right now is in a situation that has a better tax situation has a much better chance of throwing out an offer sheet to somebody else because of what has to get met. Because if you throw out an offer sheet, and again, they don't have the money, but in Vegas or in Florida, and you look at the tax differential between there and a place like Montreal or Toronto, you're looking at $1.5 million extra of dollars that are putting in your pocket that they can't do in those teams. And to me, that's a bigger advantage than some of the big market teams have in terms of
I do want to address
something money out the door.
With all of this. I spoke to a few Islander fans yesterday, and they would love the offer sheet, right, for Marner.
Right.
I get it. They just want to make their team better.
And they want to make Toronto suffer, right? And I understand.
No, I don't think they care about Toronto suffering. The Islander fans right now are focused on making their team better. Why? Because they didn't do anything in the offseason. They brought back former players, and they gave too much term to Varlamov, and they're even thinking that's better than keeping Leonard right now, which I think is a huge risk. I don't care if Mitch Korn's there or not. So they're frustrated from the fact that they want some more scoring, but they also aren't the low cap team that they used to be, because now they have some contracts that they can't get rid of. Boychuk would be one. The Varlamov contract's not a great contract. And so now all of a sudden they're not the bottom of the cap team money either. And so their Islander fans are frustrated. So they would love to see the Marner thing. But then when I brought it back and said, well, what if somebody offer sheets Barzal next year? The answer is, well, that's not going to happen. So they're not living in reality.
That's most certainly going to happen because if they offer sheet Marner, I definitely think Barzal's getting one.
Oh yeah, you don't think that if they offer sheeted Mikko Rantanen, that Joe Sakic wouldn't go around next year and say, okay, I'm going to offer sheet Matthew Barzal. How about that? We've seen the revenge offer sheet in the NHL before. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And I don't think the Leafs, I think the Leafs and Marner are going to get a deal. I think they're going to press it until probably training camp. He's looking for as many dollars as he can get. That's his right. I think if they get him locked up on a long-term deal, there's a possibility they end up trading a guy like William Nylander to clear cap space. But, again, if it gets to late September and it's still undone, they can't go into the season like they did with Nylander last year. The cap hit for this year would not allow them. They would have a situation where they'd have to clear millions of dollars to fit Marner under the cap. So that's why this is going to be resolved one way or the other before the start of the season. Okay, want to play our little game, our little 1-year contract, PTO or nada. And I'm starting doing this because of the news that happened this morning. Bill Meltzer reported on, I got it from, I believe, a Czech outlet.
I scored in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. That Michael Neuwirth, the former Flyer, former Cap, he's currently practicing with the Czech national team, but that he has signed a PTO with the Maple Leafs, which it is, and I'll write about this a little later on. This is my belief that Garrett Sparks will not be back. That it's either going to be Garrett Sparks buried in the minors or Garrett Sparks traded before the beginning of the season, and either Michael Hutchinson, who is a veteran guy, or Neuwirth, if he can stay healthy, on a PTO, that they eventually sign him. Now, curious, he signed a PTO because there's no contract there, and they don't have to spend $1 taking it away from a potential deal for Marner. So I think the Leafs are going to go down the PTO road more with other players later on. But Anthony, you saw the numerous injuries on Neuwirth in the years in Philadelphia. The question is, is it possible that he can be an effective backup and play 25 to 30 games, or is he just his body rigid?
If he can be healthy, he can be an excellent goaltender. That has always been the question with Michael Neuwirth. He goes through stretches where when he's locked in, he's as good as they come when he goes through certain stretches. But you just can't count on you can't use him in a manner other than a backup at best. I think at this point of his career, he just isn't reliable enough. I think what Toronto's doing here is smart. I think PTO is the smart way to go. I know he said that there were other guaranteed contracts that he was offered. Yeah. Which I find, which is, it's possible. It's certainly.
I think he sees an avenue here where he can get the number 2 job. That's what that.
Right. I think that's the possibility here. But again, injuries and everything else. He's just not reliable. That's the issue at this point.
Russ, go ahead, because I saw you.
He will charm everybody in camp. There will be articles written about his athleticism. He will talk about his new workout program. He maybe even has a new coach again. Like, we've heard all these things, right? He will get hurt. He will get hurt numerous times until he can't play again. That's what happens every season. If I'm the Leafs, even if I'm getting close to signing him, I'm taking like an MRI of his groin, or I'm not signing a contract.
Maybe also a 2-way deal, I think. That's the offer that he might get.
That's how iffy he is as far as being injured. He is definitely a talented goalie. Do not go by his age. Bad groins know no age. Well, this is a guy who's just going to have groin problem after groin problem.
And this is what I see here is like, okay, they have Hutchinson, who has NHL experience, over 100 games NHL experience. Neuwirth experience with the question mark with the injuries, as we just talked about. They need at least 2 veteran options if they trade Sparks, which I think they're going to, because after them you have Joseph Wall and you have Ian Scott, two good goaltending prospects who have no pro experience whatsoever. Actually, one game of AHL for Scott. So they need a buffer zone between those kids. And
I think it's a two-way. That's why I think there's a chance here. If he does get signed with the Leafs, it'll be a potential two-way contract.
I'm going to tell you this, Mike. For whatever you think about Sparks, and it's fine to think it, you cover the team.
Yeah.
He still had a 9.02 and he was 8-9. I can't tell you either one of these goalies will do any better than that.
Oh, well, I can tell you
You're now going to sell me on Michael Hutchinson to the point?
It's not Russ. It's not me. It's Mike Babcock. Mike Babcock will not play this guy. He would rather pull somebody out of the frickin' stands.
He played him 20 times last year.
I know he had no other option.
Well, he still may have no other options when camp breaks.
He had no other option until Michael Hutchinson played his 9th game, and then they were going to probably lose him on waivers if they had to send him down. So they buried him down there, and then they overplayed Freddie Anderson like they normally do, and they cannot do that anymore. So anyway, let's play our game here. We'll go with five guys here, and then we'll do this throughout the week because as we talked about, news is slowing down. But we're getting to the point now, and Neuwirth is an example where players who don't have an offer, don't have a guaranteed contract, are going to be willing to take the PTO. I'll put 5 names, and I think I mentioned him earlier, but since we're closer now, let's start with Dion Phaneuf. And Dion Phaneuf was bought out. He's 34 years old. He had a terrible year with Los Angeles. Can't dispute his experience, Anthony, but I don't know. I mean, with the game speeding up, and he's not fast, I don't know if he's going to get the 1-year deal. So 1-year deal, PTO or nada.
I'm vacillating between PTO and nada. I'm really at that point now with him. I'm going to go just on the benefit of his NHL experience, saying he's going to get a PTO.
Okay, Jan.
I'll go with PTO also on this one.
Russ.
I'm going to go nada. I mean, I'm looking at his last 2 years, and like last year, as an example, 67 games, 6 points, 128 hits, like minus 21. I could bring up someone from the AHL and get better results. And so I think a lot of teams are going to feel that way too.
I think he's going to get a PTO. I don't know if it's Toronto. I think that there's too much water under the bridge. They're going to be naming a team captain this year, and I don't know if they want bring in the former captain when they're naming another team captain. So, but they do need defense. But there are other teams that might be willing to give it a chance, but only on a PTO. I don't think anybody's giving them a 1-year deal.
I want to also say this. Mm-hmm. Considering that I've seen him play for his entire career and saw what he looked like out of the gate, the fact that we're talking about a guy that's a minus 57 in his career and not even a half a point a game, a .34, he may be the most disappointing defenseman of his era, considering the amount of talent this guy had. It's crazy.
Especially when he was drawing comparisons to Scott Stevens.
Yeah.
After he scored, with all the hits, and then he scored over 20 goals with Calgary. Yeah, the precipitous decline in his game is pretty interesting. Okay, Jan, I'll start with you first because I know you got to go pretty soon. Dan Girardi, former Ranger, former Tampa Bay Lightning, was a UFA. Had 16 points in 62 games last year. 35 years old, slowing down, but he didn't play badly in Tampa, which would make me think that he would get a 1-year offer. But we're in late July and he's still out there. So 1-year deal, PTO or nada.
I think with Girardi, as you said, I don't think he played badly. I think he played better in Tampa because he was sheltered a bit more than obviously he was in New York because he was playing major minutes. Definitely a slow down. If I'm going to give Phaneuf a PTO, I'm going to give Girardi a 1-year deal. Very late in camp that somebody's going to sign him to kind of a 1-year deal.
Okay. Jan, we're getting an echo, so maybe just drop off here.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Jan. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Anthony. Hold on here. The echo didn't leave with Jan. Hold on.
Mm-hmm. To me.
It might. Now it's gone.
Okay.
Sometimes when you mute the microphone, it goes away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Dan Girardi, 1 year PTO or nada?
Tough one on that one. He's between. He's between. I get what Jan's saying in terms of a 1 year deal, solid year, but he is slowing down. I'm gonna go PTO.
Russ?
I'm going to go 1 year deal. I think teams that are in a bind right now, including Tampa, waiting on the Braden Point deal, are just asking him to hang around. So I think he will get that deal. He could definitely play towards end of periods, block shots. He's good in the room.
Right.
I think if it's Tampa, it's 1 year deal. Elsewhere, it's PTO.
Because look, when you look at the Tampa blue line, and now like on Cap Friendly, they've got Luke Shen penned in there. You'd still rather have Dan Girardi than Luke Shen.
Yeah, I'd rather have Luke Shen than Andre Schuster, but
Right.
you know, I think I'd rather have.
Here's what's getting worse for Tampa: Luke Witkowski, Luke Shen, Jan Rutta. That's what gives Dan Girardi a chance.
Right. I think he'll get a 1 year, and I agree with Anthony. It could be 1 year back with Tampa, but if they're deciding they're going to,
I said it.
Okay, I thought Anthony said the same thing.
Oh, did he? I missed that.
Yeah. Is there an echo in here?
No, my bad.
But I think there will be teams out there willing to give him a 1 year deal other than Tampa. He's still a good defenseman. He's a right-hand shot, and that's a need for a team that I think that he'll at least get that guaranteed 1 year.
Hold on. I want to answer one thing because Kevin Smith said he believes Ekblad is more of a disappointment than Phaneuf. Ekblad had multiple concussions and definitely came back too soon.
Yeah.
And it has affected him. There's no question about it. Phaneuf didn't have any such problems like that.
No, Phaneuf has just gotten old and gotten slow, and he was
the biggest problem with Phaneuf.
He was slowing down when the Leafs signed him to the 7 year, $49 million contract. That's why that contract was dumb.
Right.
And now, so there was 6 more years to go, and he was starting to slow down. Anyway,
right.
Thomas Vanek, who scored 36 points, 16 goals with Detroit last year. 1 year contract. Start with you, Russ. 1 year contract, PTO or nada?
I'm going to say nada. He might be a guy that has to wait until like camp is going and somebody gets injured. Then someone gives Thomas Vanek a call because they're like, all right, at least we could use him on the power play. Like, I think that's where his career is at right now.
Anthony?
Yeah, same boat. Nada. No contract offer unless there's injuries.
I think he gets a PTO, and I have a weird feeling that it's going to be with his old team, the Buffalo Sabres, because Ralph Kruger, he talked up Ralph Kruger big time when Ralph Kruger was hired. Ralph Kruger had him on Team Europe, and the Sabres, are weak on the wing. Now, they could be weak on the left side if they move Marcus Johansson to the right, or they could be weak on the right if they go with Connor Sheary as one of their top 6. Vanek probably could still play a top 6, top 9 role. The problem is he's really slow, and I think if you play him in that role, he goes to the net and he's still good in front of him.
I'm trying to keep up with Jack Eichel.
I don't think they'll put him on.
I'll call it the James Neal principle, right, Ross?
Yes. I want to tell Sabres fans. I want to tell Sabres fans Matt Molson's unsigned too. So
is Jason Pominville, and they could bring him back too.
That wouldn't surprise me one bit.
That wouldn't shock me.
Okay, Ben Lovejoy, former New Jersey Devil, traded to the Dallas Stars. Dallas did not re-sign him. 9 points in 71 games. More of just, I'd say, stay at home, bottom pairing defenseman now at 35 years old. Right hand shot. Anthony, 1 year contract, PTO or nada?
Someone always has time for Ben Lovejoy. So I'm gonna say I'm gonna say a 1 year deal with someone.
Russ?
No, I'm gonna say I think Ben Lovejoy has reached the end of his life cycle as an NHLer.
I think he'll get a PTO. I think with somebody. It's somebody. Yeah, somebody who's not happy with their bottom pairing or having a veteran depth guy.
They're not going to be much happier if they hire.
Sure, but I think I'll just use the team that I cover as an example. Would I rather have Ben Lovejoy or Martin Marinson? Next. Okay.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, last one. Riley Sheehan, traded from Pittsburgh to Florida, played all 82 games, 9 goals, 10 assists. 27 years old, and that's the thing. It's like he's young enough that I think he probably. I'll go first. I think he'll get a late 1-year contract from somebody, probably for the veteran minimum of $700,000 or the league minimum, sorry, of $700,000. Anthony, 1-year PTO or nada.
Same number, same year, same number as you, Mike.
Okay, Russ.
Yeah, he's a good fourth line center. He'll get a contract. He is still young. He can skate. He's got some vision. He'll get some points. Teams like him for that role, so somebody will give him that role.
Yeah, and he made $2.1 million last year. So if he gets the league minimum, it's a $1.4 million pay cut. But right now, I think he'd just be happy to get himself a job for next year.
Right.
So, okay, good show, guys. We'll be back tomorrow. We should have Eck back tomorrow. For the departed Jan Levine, for Anthony Mangione, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thanks for watching. And remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.